Olá, bom dia, pessoal, tudo bem? Sou Iris da Winner. Estamos aqui hoje para essa segunda sessão do nosso Café com Cambridge, falando das nuances entre os níveis B2 e C1. Nossa speaker hoje é a Mônica Carvalho, nossa coordenadora pedagógica, e ela apresentou este talk lá no IATEFL, em Edimburgo, e é com muita alegria que a gente disponibiliza esse conteúdo hoje para vocês. A sala lotou, né, Mônica? Então, acho que vocês vão poder aproveitar de um conteúdo muito relevante. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everybody. Let me start sharing here. Is it okay, Iris? Can you see my screen? Yes.
Yeah, I can. It's everything
All right.
fine. So just, would you like to remember just a point, sorry, that this is the first Café com Cambridge for this year, and we will have another sessions with another topics, so stay tuned because we have a lot of content to share with you.
So, good morning again, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Mônica, and here are some facts about me, but what I love most is traveling. Like Iris said, I've just returned from Scotland. I presented this talk there at the IATEFL International Conference. And today I'll be speaking about identifying language distinctions between B2 and C1 proficiency. So in this talk, we will explore how to distinguish between B2 and C1 proficiency. We'll analyze real-life examples, dive into the CFR descriptors, and engage in an interactive activity where you have the chance to identify B2 versus C1 language. And by the end of this talk, I hope you have a clear understanding of how these levels differ and how you can help students move past the intermediate plateau. So I want to start by asking you this question. So have you ever had a student who seemed stuck at B2 and couldn't quite make the leap to C1? You can answer in the chat, but I guess most of you will have answered yes, right?
Yes. Regiane, yes. Priscila, yes. Amanda, yes. Marion, yes. Stephanie, yes.
All right, so that's why we're here today. So we're going to start by considering the verb take, which speakers use in many different ways depending on their level. For instance, at A1, they might say take photos. By A2, they could use it in the context of travel, like take a cab. At B1, they might say take a full-time course. By B2, they might use an expression like take after my mother. At C1, they would say something like take it from me. And at C2, they might say take an its tool. So as you can see, the verb take is used at all levels. But what changes is how speakers use it in more specific and nuanced ways as their language skills develop. Just a quick note here. The examples I've shared here were taken from a corpus called English Profile, which I'll be discussing in more detail later in my talk. So we're going to start by focusing on B2 vocabulary. So at this level, speakers typically use a range of vocabulary that allows them to discuss familiar topics with relative ease. However, their vocabulary tends to be basic or general, and they may struggle to fine-tune it for specific contexts or nuances. The goal at this level is for speakers to comfortably engage in conversations or write about common things, but they still rely on familiar or safe words. So let's talk about familiar topics. These topics are the ones that are easy to access because they are relevant to learners' day-to-day lives or global concerns. So B2 speakers can navigate these topics confidently, but they may still face challenges in expressing nuanced opinions or elaborating in depth. So take a look at this example. I think technology is very useful because it helps people communicate faster. So the speaker here expresses a clear, simple opinion on a familiar topic, technology, using basic vocabulary and straightforward structures. The speaker uses a simple opinion phrase, I think, and a direct reason because it helps people communicate faster. So while the idea here is communicated effectively, the vocabulary choice, useful, communicate faster, is very common, and the structure remains basic. So at the B2 level, sentences tend to follow a fairly predictable structure. For example, in this case, subject, verb, object. Let's talk about flexibility. B2 speakers have a limited range of vocabulary. So while they can speak on various topics with accuracy, their ability to manipulate language in a flexible way, such as by using synonyms or paraphrasing, is still developing. So they may know basic vocabulary for a topic, but they struggle to choose the perfect word that fits a nuanced situation. So, for instance, the speaker in the example we talked about could improve by using a more precise word instead of useful, such as innovative or constructive. So, but B2 speakers, they often avoid these more complex words because they are not yet confident in their ability to use them appropriately. And as B2 learners move towards C1, they need to expand their vocabulary and focus on precision and flexibility. It's not just about using the correct word, but also choosing the most fitting word for a specific context. Now let's talk about C1 vocabulary. At this level, speakers gain a wide range of vocabulary, and they develop the ability to use this vocabulary flexibly and precisely. They are able to adjust their language to suit the context, making their speech or writing more dynamic and nuanced. C1 speakers can select words with greater accuracy and sophistication, avoiding repetition and conveying more specific meanings. So, this ability to adapt vocabulary allows them to be more expressive and effective in communication. And they can also give and exchange views on both familiar and unfamiliar topics, demonstrating their ability to engage effectively in discussions on a wide variety of subjects. So, just as with B2 speakers, C1 speakers can engage confidently with everyday topics. However, they do so with more precision and depth. Look at these two sentences. So both sentences convey the idea that technology is beneficial because it facilitates quicker communication. However, the C1 sentence is more formal, impersonal, and academic in tone, using passive structures and a compound adjective high speed, while the B2 sentence is more direct and casual. Let's talk about unfamiliar topics. C1 speakers can also navigate unfamiliar topics by quickly adapting their vocabulary to understand and discuss complex concepts and abstract ideas. They are not limited to basic words, and they can comfortably explore new areas by using synonyms, paraphrasing, and adjusting their language. So let's take a look at some unfamiliar topics. Just a few examples. So in a conversation about environmental sustainability, a C1 speaker might say this. Take a look. Here, the speaker shows not only the ability to use advanced vocabulary, but also to grasp the complexity of an unfamiliar issue, explaining it with sophistication. And one of the key features of C1 vocabulary use is the ability to adapt language based on the situation. So a C1 speaker can switch between formal and informal registers, depending on the audience, the topic, or purpose. They can also manipulate tone and style to match the desired effect, adjusting the intensity or subtlety of their language. So instead of saying very good, a C1 speaker might choose words like superior, splendid, or jaw-dropping. Here, the speaker demonstrates the ability to select words that convey a stronger and more precise meaning. Because the phrase very good is vague, while superior suggests a higher standard. Splendid carries a refined elegance. And jaw-dropping adds a sense of astonishment or extreme admiration. So the choice of words also depends on the context. For example, superior is often used in formal settings, while jaw-dropping is more informal and expressive. C1 speakers can also avoid unnecessary repetition by using synonyms and paraphrasing. And this not only makes their language more varied, but also keeps their communication engaging and precise. So instead of repeating the word important, a C1 speaker might use terms like prominent, supreme, earth-shaking, notable, mission crucial, grand. C1 speakers can also adjust the nuance of their language depending on the situation, allowing them to convey ideas with greater clarity and effectiveness. For a formal presentation, a C1 speaker might say this. While in a more casual setting, they might say this. So the formal version uses more precise and academic language, which is typical for a professional or academic context. It also relies on the passive voice. On the other hand, the informal version simplifies the structure, making it suitable for a casual or marketing context. So this ability to adjust the language based on the situation demonstrates a deeper understanding of the context and audience. Now, let's focus a little bit on grammar. So at B2, speakers can form grammatically correct sentences using common structures, but their range is restricted and their control over complexity is not yet fully developed. So they can produce complex sentences, but may rely on simpler phrasing or make mistakes. So although they may attempt more complex structures, these attempts are not usually fully controlled or consistent. So I will show you what is expected from a B2 speaker according to this research that I will mention more at the end. And I'll briefly go over some of the key features, but for more details, there will be a handout available at the end of the session, okay? So let's start with some common features at B2. One of them is using compound adjectives. They are able to use compound adjectives, but their range may be limited to common expressions they have encountered before, like user-friendly. They may struggle to create new compound adjectives naturally. Conditionals. So this is the one example of the first conditional. The sentence is correctly structured, but it is a standard pattern. B2 speakers, they may struggle with mixed conditional or more nuanced forms. Let's move on to relative clauses. So the sentence here is correct, but somewhat wordy. A C1 speaker might naturally reduce it. Let's talk about inversions. B2 speakers can use inversions with never, no sooner than, and not only but also, but with limited flexibility and not in all the tenses and forms. So, for example, the inversion with never is mostly used with I, no sooner. They may recognize it and use it in formal context, though it might not yet be fully natural for them. And the inversion with not only but also is possible, but they might find it challenging to produce it spontaneously, and it is typically used in the present simple, only in the present simple. Now let's talk about the passive. B2 learners, they can form basic structures in the passive, but they may not yet manipulate them flexibly in different tenses or more complex contexts. They can use the passive in the infinitive, present continuous, past simple, past continuous, present perfect simple, past perfect simple, with modal verbs, with verbs taking two objects, with will, with get plus reflexive pronoun, and with have plus object plus verb. So these are some of the possibilities they may produce. At B2, learners display increasing control and range in their use of perfect aspect forms. So they can confidently use the present perfect simple with negative forms, like the first example, questions, and adverbs. Their ability to use the past perfect simple and continuous is expanding, enabling them to provide, for example, background information with because and relative clauses, express regrets, and indicate changes in situations, like this example here. They also develop awareness of more advanced structures, such as inversions, question forms, and a wide range of adverbs. But they develop this awareness, but they may not produce them naturally. They can use the past perfect continuous in the affirmative and negative with adverbs, in a relative clause after a time conjunction to give background information. they can use the perfect form of must and the future perfect, simple and continuous in the most simpler versions of these two structures. So now let's focus on C1 grammar. The use of complex structures is more precise and flexible. At C1, learners expand their grammatical range, making their speech and writing more natural and sophisticated. They can manipulate grammar to express subtle meanings, emphasize points, and maintain cohesion across longer discourse. So let's take a look at some common grammar features at C1. Focusing first on compound adjectives. C1 speakers use a wider variety of compound adjectives naturally, and they can combine multiple ones to create precise and impactful descriptions, like well-to-do family. Thinking about conditionals, at the C1 level, they demonstrate greater flexibility and sophistication in their use of conditionals. They can go beyond basic conditional forms by using imperatives, third conditional, and they employ the elliptic if clauses. Additionally, they can incorporate formal structures such as if you should and inversions with should. Focusing on inversion. So C1 speakers demonstrate more flexibility with the not only but also structure using various tenses and negative forms. They can use inversion with should, had, and were as well. Focusing on passive structures, they demonstrate greater sophistication and control in their use of the passive, particularly in formal and academic context. So they can employ the passive reporting structures with can, the passive non-finite in ing form. They can also form the present continuous passive in negative statements, and they have the ability to use the passive with it as a dummy subject. Something completely different from B2 is that C1 speakers are able to use cleft sentences and reduced relative clauses. Moving on to the perfect aspect forms, at the C1 level, speakers exhibit greater precision and flexibility in their use of perfect aspect forms. They can confidently use full negative forms in the present perfect simple with a variety of verbs. And their mastery of the past perfect simple includes the ability to use inversion. Additionally, they can use the future perfect simple with adverbs and also to make assumptions about the present. Okay? So far we've focused on the key differences in vocabulary and grammar between B2 and C1 speakers. However, there are other aspects of language proficiency that also evolve as learners progress, such as discourse management, pronunciation, and interactive communication. I won't go into too much detail on this, but I just wanted to highlight some key differences. At B2, speakers can communicate effectively but may hesitate, rely on simpler cohesive devices, and have some challenges with pronunciation and maintaining interaction. At C1, however, speech is more fluid, well-structured, and natural, with better control of stress, rhythm, and interaction. And these factors, along with vocabulary and grammar that we have already talked about, they contribute to a more sophisticated and confident level of communication. So, now that we've looked at some of the key vocabulary and grammar differences, I want to see if you can identify which level each sentence belongs to. We're going to have 4 tasks. So here goes the first one. Get ready. You can type answers in the chat. It will give me a thumbs up when most of you have replied. All right. So let's go. Which sentence is B2 and which is C1? And what makes them different?
Okay, we have some answers here.
All right, so let me show you the answer so you can compare to yours. So the first one is B2 and the second one is C1. Now let me tell you why. This first structure uses inversion with the auxiliary do in the simple present, which is typical for B2. The structure remains fairly basic, fairly simple, and the sentence is clear and effective, but doesn't demonstrate the more complex use of inversion. And on the other hand, the second one uses inversion with the auxiliary didn't in the past simple. So it's in the past simple and in the negative. This is a more advanced use of inversion, typical of C1, because it adds a layer of complexity and nuance. C1 speakers can use this structure more naturally and flexibly, making their speech more sophisticated and polished. All right, let's go to the second one. Now it's vocabulary. Focus on the word hard, the use of the word hard.
Okay, most of people are guessing C1's the number 1 and B2 the number 2, but there's some different opinions too. Let's check.
Yes. So who guessed the number 1 was C1? Guessed right. But I hope you didn't focus on this word unforeseen, because that was not the point of the exercise. But so let me explain to you why. So in the second sentence, the word har refers to someone being harsh, not gentle or kind. At B2, speakers use hard to describe things or people that lack sensitivity or are emotionally tough. It's a straightforward use of the word that most learners would be familiar with. On the other hand, hard in sentence number 1 is used in a more abstract way, describing something full of problems and difficult to manage. This is a more advanced use of the word, as it conveys a deeper meaning of difficulty that goes beyond simple physical or emotional hardness. So C1 speakers can use words like hard to express complex situations with more precision. Another one that focuses on grammar. Only 2 more to go. This one I talked about. Let's see if you remember.
I think they remember.
Yeah?
Yeah. So most people think that number one C1 and number two B2.
That's right. And so the difference is that in the first one, you can see the adverb here. So it shows a more nuanced control of the language. C1 speakers use adverbs naturally with greater flexibility. Okay, so making this sentence sound more sophisticated and precise. This ability to insert adverbs smoothly is what sets C1 apart from B2 in this case. Excellent. Let's go to the last one. It's about vocabulary again. There are two expressions with make.
Answers are coming.
Let's see.
So for number one is winning B2 and C1 for number two.
That's right. It's because makes sense. Express something that is logical or reasonable. It's a fairly basic expressions, that learners use to explain something in simple terms, and it works in many contexts. So it's a more obvious meaning. The second one is more specific and sophisticated. It refers to intentionally leaving enough time to do something, even when you have a lot of other things to do. So, C1 speakers can choose phrases that show a deeper level of meaning, and they can flexibly use them to express themselves. So, the phrase make time reflects a more nuanced understanding of managing one's schedule and priorities. So, thank you so much for participating. But before we wrap up, I'd like to share two valuable tools. English profile, that I said I would talk more about this, but I mentioned it when we talk about the verb take. English profile is an online resource and research program that provides a clear breakdown of the grammar and vocabulary students use at each CFR level. It is based on real learner data and Cambridge research, supported by the Council of Europe and led by Cambridge University Press and Cambridge English Language Assessment with a lot of other partners. So, to make this research accessible to educators like ourselves, English Profile offers two free online tools: English Vocabulary Profile Online and English Grammar Profile Online. So teachers, coordinators, they can use these tools to check which words and grammar structures are appropriate for B2 and which are expected at C1. In fact, all the examples, all of them, all the examples I've used throughout my talk came from English Profile. Another suggestion that I have, I think it's more common, is Quizlet, which is an interactive learning platform that helps students reinforce new vocabulary and grammar structures through digital flashcards, Quizlets, games. It's a great way to make review sessions more engaging and effective. You or your students can create personalized flashcard sets focusing on vocabulary and grammar points. And you can encourage them to use the learn mode, the matching games. So these are just a few examples of tools that I personally like and use, but of course there are many other great resources out there. So here is an example of how you can use the English grammar profile online. Here I've searched for adjectives and filtered by B2 and C1 levels. As you can see, the tool provides specific can-do statements, like how B2 learners start using compound adjectives, such as up-to-date and state-of-the-art. So, and it also includes real learner examples, helping teachers understand how students at different levels typically use grammar structures. This makes it an excellent reference for designing targeted activities to help learners progress. And now moving on to Quizlet, here you can see a C1 vocabulary set. This is the title of this list of words. The first word is here. This is a flashcard, and the learners have all these possibilities to practice. So imagine this, you can integrate English profile to guide your instruction, to select grammar points, vocabulary, and Quizlet to support your practice. So with these two, you can provide students with clear learning goals and engaging ways to develop their vocabulary and grammar. So research using English profile and then create lists using Quizlet to help your students or yourselves bridge the gap from B2 to C1, from C1 to C2. So thank you all for your attention today. We've delved into the key differences between B2 and C1 in terms of vocabulary and grammar. We also explored examples of grammar and vocabulary in context, as well as how some tools can be available to guide students' progress. I hope you found the examples and explanations helpful as you support your students in overcoming the intermediate plateau. And before I hear your thoughts or any questions you might have, because for that I have to stop sharing, I just want to show you my references so you can find everything in these references. And here is a QR code that links to a summary of today's talk and all the materials I've shared, including my slides. Okay, so you can find a handout and my slides on this QR code. If you have any further questions or would like to continue the conversation about today's topic, feel free to reach out. Thank you so much for being here. So I'll stop sharing now so I can see your questions. Does anybody have any question? Thank you, Iris, for posting there. Thank you so much. If you have any question, just type in the chat. Thanks, Christina. Thanks, everyone. Thank you for being here, Stephanie. Thank you so much. I hope to see everybody in our next session. Thank you, Carmen. Thank you, everyone. Happy Mother's Day if you are a mother. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks, Iris, for helping me today.
Thank you, Mônica.
Thank you, everyone.
We have a question for Marcila.
To compare sentences side by side, what do you mean? Like, you can, when you research there, you can use, for example, compound adjectives. You can filter by B2 and C1, and then on the same screen, it's possible to see both examples. It is possible. The QR code, yes, it is will send to you. Okay. And vocabulary, thinking about English profile, if you want to compare, if you remember my screen with the verb take, that's exactly what you have there. So when you research for a specific word, you have all the meanings of the word depending on the level. So everything is there with examples. So like you saw on my screen, it's what you will see if you research on the English profile vocabulary online. So it's there, you know, it's amazing. Even like for us to just play with words, you type one word there and you scroll down and you have like they use in A1, A2, B1, B2, C1, C2, all the different ones there. In the grammar is not the same, you know, but it is there. You just type present perfect, simple, and then you will have a list with all the verb tenses, the can-do statements, and it's possible to click and see the learner example there. Okay, no more questions? Thank you. If you have a question in the future, just reach out to us. That we'll be glad to help.
Yes, thank you so much for your presence. And I hope you see all again in our next session in the future with another topic about exams that can help you on your day by day. See you soon,
See
Carmen.
you.
All right, guys. So we finish this session. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much for today. Bye-bye.